We're live now. And again, I just want to say on record, I'm so excited to do this podcast with you because this is going to be such an interesting topic that we're going to be covering and getting into. And I think what better timing with everything that's happening in the world, spirituality, timeline, collapses, reaching full potential, religious topics. So I'm so excited to speak to you about all of this. But going back to what we were saying just a few moments ago, we're going to come back to that. But tell me about you, because we're meeting for the first time on camera. We've been talking a bit on text, and we had a really interesting conversation the first time that we caught up. I was like, let's save it for the pod. So take it away. Tell us about you and, your story and all the interesting stuff that people would want to know about Alja.
Oh, wow. All the interesting stuff. I wonder what people would want to know at this point, because I'm quite private online. I normally just teach. I don't necessarily share that much about me. So a little bit about my background. So I'm Slovenian, born and raised in Slovenia. I spent the first 18 years of my life there. Then I moved abroad to England after high school directly. So I studied neuroscience there, and I wanted to study neuroscience. Quite ironic because I left academia afterwards and worked in holistic health, and now I do totally different spiritual stuff. But the original reason why I went and studied neuroscience is because I was really fascinated by how we can heal neuropsychiatric conditions, anxiety, depression. And I think I even put in my application statement for a university. I wish I could find it. I was thinking the other day, it would be so funny to find that application statement that I wrote when I was 18. But I think I wrote something like having this dream of discovering the universal pill that is going to cure all of these things. It is so funny. But I come from a scientific family, right? Both of my parents are scientists. This was very much the kind of thing growing up. And I'm going to add a little bit of a caveat. I wasn't raised in a conventional hardcore scientific family. My mom is Catholic. My dad is an atheist, but there was religion present in the house, spirituality, and my parents are both very strong on critical thinking and common sense, right? So it wasn't this scientific indoctrination, as I would call it, as it could be a lot worse. But yeah, I'm just going to call it could be worse. But it was still the kind of prevalent thinking was like, along these lines, Western medicine, like scientific, always wanting to know the proof. It was actually an interesting clash, I would say, because my mom had this, show me the proof, but she was also religious, right? And religion, of course, demands faith.
Yes.
And so there was this clash of a lot of the time, what I would describe as a bit of cognitive dissonance. But looking back, a very interesting environment to be raised in. And then I went to university. I spent 4 years in London. I finished my bachelor's and master's there. I loved it. Definitely found myself in it. I'm very analytical. I'm very good at connecting information, connecting the dots, which I do bring into my work these days too, even though it's a totally different field. But by the end of, I would say, my bachelor's, I started really having questions. I took many modules, even though I did neuroscience and I loved neuro part. My favorite part was actually pharmacology, right? Which is the study of how drugs and different substances affect the human body, physiology. And so I took many modules in different forms of pharmacology. And I think it was the second year of my studies where I remember sitting there and I don't know what we studied because I had systemic pharmacology, which was just a year-long module on the whole body and different drugs and different things. And I don't remember what we were covering, but I distinctly recall sitting in my lecture and for the first time having this realization, there is absolutely no pharmaceutical drug out there that doesn't come with side effects.
There's none.
It can't be because of the way it works, right? The body doesn't work linearly, right? Everything is every single molecule, every single enzyme in the body does multiple things. So when you affect one, you're going to affect a bunch of things downstream, as it's called. But I think it was the first time where I had really this realization. I was like, hold on. There was also a few moments where we were studying drugs that we didn't know how they actually worked. We were just like, they work. And I was like, I'm not okay with that. I think it was using lithium for bipolar. And they were basically like, we don't know how this works, but it works. And I'm like, that's a heavy metal. I found it very strange, very strange. And I think this started, it made me look at things a little bit differently, right? Because I think science is oftentimes presented as this. I say that science today for a lot of people has become a new religion, right? If it's said proven by science, people will be like, it is how it is. And normally people who view it like that are people who never conducted a proper scientific experiment in their lives. I've had so many people try to argue with me about these things. And I'm like, but you've never seen any of that. And most people who actually see how science is conducted have more questions. Not everyone, but many. So that was, I would say, the start of me being like starting to not be convinced in the whole thing. And then it was at the end of my master's, so that was at the end of the fourth year, that basically, long story short, I went through an extremely stressful period of time. And my mind started doing really weird things. It was the first time in my life I started having really nihilistic, dark thoughts. And I wasn't used to that, right? I was a pretty gloomy person back then looking at it. I was not a happy human, but I wasn't having thoughts that I would describe as dark. And they started coming up, and they were very much thoughts along the lines of nothing matters. What's the point anyways? This kind of stuff, I would describe as a gray, dark, gray kind of energy. And luckily, I had the discernment back then without having any spirituality or anything like this, that I was like, this is not okay. Whatever this is not normal. This is not me. And I'm not accepting this as a part of my life. And what then happened at that time was that I had a good friend of mine who went to an ayahuasca retreat.
Wow.
And I had experimented a lot with psychedelics. Our university did this incredible thing where they put the Department of Neuroscience and Pharmacology together. So you had all the nerds that loved studying drugs and all the nerds that loved studying the brain in one space. And of course, the crossover of that made a lot of people want to do a lot of psychedelics, which we did. So I had experience with that, and I read about ayahuasca and all this, but I always had it as a bit of one day. And then it just kind of came into my life, and it was like, and I talked to that friend of mine, and I just had that knowing. I was like, I have to do this. And so I signed up and I went to that retreat. That was really at the end of my master's. So that was August 2018. And I had what people would call a spiritual awakening that really lifted that veil. And I was, for the first time in my life, I was like, oh, this is how the world actually works. And it was in one night that that framework of the Western hyper-materialistic, whatever way of thinking, it just kind of came crashing down. And it wasn't dramatic for me. For me, those things, looking back, they never really made sense. I was always very spiritual as a kid. I was always very intuitive. So it was more like a relief. It was more like really a remembering of, oh yeah, this is how things work. Cool. But of course, the irony of that was that about 3 weeks after that, I was moving to Germany to start my PhD. So I went straight from that to a very different environment, which was one of the top tier institutes in the world in Germany, which the kind of mentality and the frequency of that country is not necessarily compatible with me. And I ended up being in an environment in multiple ways that was honestly terrible, from the lab to the flatmates I lived with at the time, and then kickstarted a massive health crisis. Basically for me, like a really deep one. I always had big chronic issues growing up. My whole family did. But up until that point, they were manageable. And that kind of pushed it, I would say, over the edge. And I was faced with a choice. If I look back, it was like, either you're going to change how you're doing things or you're going to die. And I was like, okay, cool. I guess we got to do things differently. And that then led me to start diving very deep into alternative, holistic ways of healing, of understanding the world, understanding reality. And I spent the next few years diving really deep into that. And when I was doing that, I started realizing that if I'm interested in actually helping people, that's the way forward. It was never going to be Western medicine. And that actually led me to signing up for a container where I learned to become like an Ayurvedic habit coach. I learned how to coach. I learned the basics of starting my own business. And I started my own business on the side of doing my PhD. That was 2020 to 2021. And long story short, as we all know, starting your own business then comes with its own challenges. And it basically brought to the surface everything. Like all my imposter syndrome, all my inadequacy, all the BS all the beliefs I had, right? Subconscious beliefs I had about everything. And it stopped me in my tracks, like hardcore. to the point that I actually successfully launched my first program. I sold it out. I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And then all of the stuff came to the surface. It all got triggered. And about a year after, I shut everything down. I literally couldn't bring myself to show up on social media. I couldn't bring myself to doing anything. I was doubting myself so much. I felt so inadequate. I had zero inspiration, nothing. And that started for me, if that was 2021, 2022, that started really a 2 or 3 year long process of then trying to understand what happened. Because I was like, the heck? Running a business is not rock science. I'm just going to say that it has its own challenges, but I did much more conceptually difficult things before. And I was like, I know I can do this. What is going on? And I started searching for an answer.
Can I ask you a question just on that note? What do you think it is about entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Having a business that exposes so much of who we are at the core, where people, entrepreneurs, business owners have this experience? Because you hear about this. I myself have also gone through this. Yeah. And I believe that being a business owner is a very spiritual journey.
Oh my goodness. It's spiritual growth on steroids.
Yeah, it really is, right? But
100%.
Why is that?
Because there's no hiding. There's no hiding. It asks you to face everything. In most jobs, you can hide to a lesser or greater extent. First off, you work a normal job, you have a paycheck guaranteed. So you don't have to deal, if you have scarcity mindset and all of those things, you're still going to deal with it, but it's going to be in a less maybe acute way, right? It shows us people being like, oh, I cannot afford this, I cannot afford that. But you know how much money you're making at the end of the month, right? You show up, you do what you're supposed to do, you get paid. Entrepreneurship, you can work 1,800 hours a week and make zero, right? And that's a certain level of perseverance that one needs to have to move, because inevitably at the beginning of entrepreneurship, almost everybody goes through that. And then there's, of course, you cannot, depending on what you do in your business, especially if you're doing more of maybe alternative spiritual things, you're going to be called all sorts of things. A lot of people are going to think you're a scammer. A lot of things are going to think you're a charlatan. You will need to stand up for what you believe in. You will have to have extremely strong conviction in yourself. And that can be true for anything else, right? Depending on your environment. You may be coming from a family that thinks that doing marketing and sales is not a worthy thing, and they may tell you their opinion about that or not be happy with what you're doing, right? So it is going to test your inner conviction in yourself and what you're doing. Then there's visibility. Most people have massive issues with visibility. You will have to show up. You will have to show up on camera. You will have to speak. You will have to articulate. You will have to show up with conviction and be like, hey, this is why working with me will absolutely change your life, or could absolutely change your life. And that actually that's going to expose any doubt you have about yourself, about your ability, about what you're doing, any friction in integrity as well, right? This is not talked enough about, but especially the field I work in, there are ways that people are taught to market and do stuff that I personally will never do. And I don't do because I don't agree with it, right? And it's out of integrity for me. And I had to reach the point where I was like, no, I can do it my way and it can still work, right? But this is basically what I would say. You cannot hide behind credentials. You cannot hide behind systems. You cannot hide behind just showing up for your job. You cannot slack off. It's pretty unforgiving. And it's going to make you face every single part of yourself. Yeah. And I wouldn't say there are many other things that do that. I would say, and I cannot speak here from personal experience, but I think being a parent is another one that does that.
You're a parent?
I'm not.
Okay.
But that's, I would imagine, another path that does something similar. That's going, and I'm going to say from personal experience, animals can do this. I work with horses as well, and horses also expose everything because they're They're a mirror. They're extremely energetic beings. And if you have a horse that's responsive, they're going to respond exclusively to your energy. So if you have doubt, they're not going to move forward. If you show up with weird, heavy energy, they're going to get all nervous or they will try to move away from you. If you're nervous, if you come even with a stomach ache, the horse will get just agitated. They're extremely sensitive. So they're and here it's nuanced because a lot of horses in sports, I think, and that's going to upset a lot of people if we have any people here who are doing professional or sports horse riding, most of it is legalized animal abuse. So I'm not talking about that, because a lot of horses there have completely shut down nervous systems because they were coerced and forced to do things for so long. That horse will just dissociate and do whatever you want them to do, not to have to face more abuse. But if you have a horse who's actually responsive and relaxed, they're responding to energy extremely well, especially if you have a sensitive one. And I work with a few very sensitive ones, and they show everything as well. So yeah, there are certain paths in life that are going to make you face every part of yourself. And I think for most people, it's parenthood. But for a lot of entrepreneurs, business is going to do that. And I would say, especially if you're building a personal brand, especially if the service in some way is you, right? Not even a product, it's going to require of you to face all of those things, especially if you want to run a business in a way where it's not based on hustle and masking and faking stuff and things that are not really sustainable long term. Because for me, I help people clear things so that they can build something that's really in integrity. I work with people who really desire to build a better world here, who really have a mission here. And for those people, integrity is of uttermost importance. And actually, we can talk about that a little bit later, but they're going to block themselves subconsciously if they're not in integrity. So finding a way to really build things in a way that it feels in what we would call an alignment is extremely important.
Such an interesting word, alignment. I hear about it so much online and offline. And I always ask myself, how do I know if I am in alignment? I think I'm in alignment, but how do I know if I really am in alignment? What does that look like, and what does that feel like?
Yeah. So I'm going to give you, and I'm going to say, for me, this is an ongoing journey of learning about these things. So oftentimes when you're going to hear me speak, I'm going to speak about things a little bit more carefully, because I'm not going to make statements that I know absolutes about anything, because it's an ongoing journey. But what I've seen and experienced is that when there is alignment, there tends to be flow. And it tends to be that things move with relative ease. So there isn't this need to push and force and hustle that much and hit your head against the wall and like all of that stuff, right? It's a lot more easeful. And that depends a lot on the beliefs you have, how much flow you're allowing. And I do believe that it probably looks different for different people, what their personal experience of flow may be. But that's in general what I would say, that like when I'm in alignment, things just move with a lot more ease. Because the way I understand it is that I understand alignment as being in alignment with, we could call them God. Some people call it universe, greater universal forces. And I deeply believe that we come here with a purpose. So that there's a certain purpose, certain mission we have here, that we're moving in that direction. And when we are in alignment with that purpose, we have support. We have a lot more support, a lot more doors open up for us than if we're trying to operate from our own ego and make something happen because we want it to be, right? And that's oftentimes where people then experience a lot of obstacles. And even if they reach the desired end result, it feels empty.
Yes.
Which, what's the point then, right?
Yeah,
a lot of people live their life like that. But what's the point if you get the fancy, fancy car, fancy property, if then you sit in your house and you're like, what now?
It doesn't feel good. I don't feel good. I thought it was going to feel better. I was going to be more fulfilled. Is this it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is when we are external outcome focused, right? Rather than being focused on what the experience feels like, and are we in alignment with our values, in alignment with our soul, in alignment with whatever we want to call it. But that's normally how I would refer to it.
The tricky thing that I find is that, say if you are building a business and all the signs are pointing towards that being your calling and your alignment, and it's feeling good in some aspects, but as we mentioned just a few moments ago, starting a business, especially in the beginning, it's not easy, and there are many ditches in the road. There are things that don't work out. They're working out, and then you have to pivot, or things come up that you need to address. Or as you mentioned, there's so many mirrors and things that have been reflected back to you. And it's such a deep spiritual work that needs to be done internally in order for you to really be able to show up in the world and show up in your business in the way that you need to. And then you often question, wait, hold on. Am I doing the right thing? Is this for me? Maybe this isn't my calling. maybe I'm not aligned. I should just go back to doing what I was doing before, because I was getting a paycheck. I was getting paid well. I was really good at selling. Maybe that was my calling. And maybe I was more aligned with working in corporate. But then you go back to that and you're like, this feels like shit.
It sucks your soul.
This can't be going, right? But it's easier. So how do we know when you say, when you're usually in alignment, things are flowing, but in business, I don't think I hear that, but then I don't experience the flow. Yeah. I hear, you need to learn this, you need to do that, you need to go here, you need to pivot there. And I'm like, is this alignment? Is this what, do you know what I mean? Like, how do you know whether you need to keep persevering or it's time to change direction? And that's why I question, am I really in alignment? Because I have passion for what I'm doing, but it's not easy.
Yeah. And I think it's very important, first off, like, the question you ask, like, how do I know is it time to pivot or to keep persevering, I think is the ultimate ground for cultivating discernment. I don't think there's like a one clear answer to that. So I think there's a couple of things here. First off, alignment, at least in my experience, alignment is not something we're in all the time, right? And also it's important to understand that when we are starting something new, when we are pivoting, it's not going to be ease and flow straight away from the beginning. Because we are learning new skills, we're learning things we just don't know how to do, right? Like we're totally new at something. And the first thing to understand is that our brain does not like change. It does not like novelty. Oftentimes not being good at something is gonna trigger a lot of responses in our system. It can trigger a lot of doubt, trigger a lot of frustration, right? So that's gonna be the whole experience. But I think it's important to understand that there's, I think, a huge, especially in the spiritual business community, there's a lot of talk about the feminine flow and business being easy. It's not always going to be easy. That's insane. And that's just like a crazy thing to say. And it's just, I think, a very deceitful marketing technique. No, when you're starting something new, it's going to be hard. The end. But no matter what you do, if you pick up a new sport tomorrow, there's going to be a new instrument. It's going to probably suck for a little while. Now, the question with that is, for example, like I'm taking, let's say, singing lessons, right? I play the guitar. I'm working now with a young horse where it is what it is. And we're both teaching each other. Actually, he's mostly teaching me at this point because I realize I'm a total noob with certain things that I feel like I really should know. But do I want what's on the other side of this? Do I want to be eventually at a place where my voice is really strong, where I can play the guitar well, where I can have a really incredible relationship with this horse? Yeah. So that means I'm going to move through these initial stages and I'm going to keep moving forward because I really desire what's on the other side. And I know that what's on the other side is something I want, right? It's something that really, it gives me fulfillment. I think it's the same because I totally know what you're talking about, because I mentioned before in my business, I had probably about a 3-year period, 4 years maybe, where things were not working. Like, I'm not one of those overnight success stories where I showed up in business. I had no background. No, my background.
I don't think anyone is. Who's, you know,
stories, but normally people who either ran a business before or they had social. I came from a scientific background. I was doing brain surgery on mice. I never did marketing before. It's not an important part. We can talk about it, but I had zero background in business, zero background in anything like this. That means you're just going to have to learn certain skills and it's going to take some time for it to click. Because I would point things then click and you're like, oh, and you're like, why was that ever difficult? But until you reach that point, it is difficult. And it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. And I think what is extremely important during those stages is it can be especially for people who have, because people tend to gravitate into one of the two major nervous system states, right? One is going to be what I call fixed mode, right? Which is like the fight kind of response, which is like, things are not working. So now I'm going to double down and I'm going to hustle and I'm going to work harder and I'm going to do everything. And normally what happens with those people is that they are going to maybe overinvest in mentorship and programs and courses they don't even need, or it's not the right time for that. Then we have flight response, which people are going to jump from one mentor to another, from one program to another. They're going to have a graveyard of different programs on their laptop that they never watch, but they're not moving forward. And then we have people who go into more of the freeze, shut down, which these are people who procrastinate or just are more in this I'm going to give up mindset. And I think it's important to recognize this and understand that during these initial stages, it just takes time. It takes time to find your own path. It takes time to learn the lessons you need to learn. It takes time to gain the skills. And it's important to honestly have humility, put your head down and just master the basics, which I would say a lot of people capitalize off of people thinking they're missing something like a magic pill or something because things are not instantly working. Whereas in reality, it just takes time to develop skills.
So nothing can substitute experience, transform yourself, and the business will follow.
For sure.
Yeah.
Always. That's how reality works, right? It's always going to be. But transforming yourself is going to mean what we could call more energy, mindset, and it's going to mean skill development, right? You'll have to learn how to do some level of marketing. You'll have to understand some level of biopsychology, right? It's just a part of the game. And it takes time, like every skill.
Yeah. I think that when you are a consumer, people are always wanting to sell you their product. When you become a business owner and you start showing up online, people are always wanting to sell you their courses, their mentorship, their services. And it's so noisy. And when you're already feeling and thinking quite vulnerably because you've just started and things are not necessarily taking traction in the way you had potentially thought, you're like, do I need all this stuff? So you, as you mentioned, you develop shiny object syndrome and 100%. You think you need to be buying everything that's being fed to you when in actual fact, it is just take your time with it, go through it, learn the things that you need to learn. It takes time. Don't be too hard on yourself. Do the work because there's no overnight success. Do you think that strategy can only take us so far? But if the founder is, say, for example, if their identity of who they are aspiring to be or who they need to be hasn't caught up yet, strategy can only take you so far and you won't. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Look, I think it's a very simple thing, right? I said this before, business is not rocket science. And there are a lot of people who teach a lot of complex strategy online. It's going to depend. I'm talking mostly, of course, about online business. It's different if you're having a proper product and all of this. But for the sake of this conversation, business strategy is very freaking simple. You need somewhere for people to find you. You need to be able to articulate what you do well. And you need to have a way for people to pay you and a way for you to deliver. That's it. That's business strategy.
Yeah.
Now, within that framework, there's like a lot of different ways this can be done. But ultimately, that's nothing particularly challenging, right? Now, what we also know, if you look around and once you've been in this space for a couple of years or so, what is that two people can take the same strategy and have wildly different results.
Yes.
And this over and over again. And on the other hand, you have people who have 6, 7, 8-figure businesses using drastically different strategies.
Yeah.
So it's very clear strategy here is not a common denominator, right? What is important is to find a strategy that works for you, that is right for your business, that is right for the season of life you're in. As a stay-at-home mom who homeschools, or like a mom who homeschools 4 kids and is running a business, has a very different need for her strategy than someone who has all the time in the world, like I do. I have a lot of free time, right? I honestly, I don't play around with strategy because I just don't care about this, but I spend a lot of my time doing other things, right? Someone who wants to sell a volume-based thing, which I don't know, they're selling something for $47 and they want to sell thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of those units, is going to need very different marketing than someone and strategy than someone who's selling high ticket programs for 5-figure plus, right? So this all needs to be taken into account and the strategy needs to be tailored to the person. But if the person behind that strategy is not energetically and subconsciously aligned to that actually working out, if they don't want what's on the other side of it, which is where subconscious really blocks us, right? So if there are subconscious obstacles to them actually having clients and serving them, if they don't fully believe in what they're selling, if they are vague and fluffy in their articulation, that messaging is oftentimes the biggest problem. But messaging is not a problem because people don't know how to write. It's so hard to write a good message. It is a skill, 100%. But most of the time it's because people are using vague and fluffy language because they don't have full belief and conviction in what they're doing, right?
How do we how do we get deep in the subconscious? What are some of the exercises and techniques that you can use? Because subconscious beliefs and patterns and thoughts are so hard to uncover because you don't even know that they're there.
Because they're subconscious. It's really annoying. It's really annoying that what runs 95% of our life we don't have access to. It's almost like it makes you feel, it makes you think who the guy who designed all this was, what they were thinking. So here's the thing. The first thing we need to understand about the subconscious is found. And for me, I think the line between when I refer to the subconscious and the energy field, I use them interchangeably because I perceive intuitively that as a one unit, even though it can be separated based on layers and all of that. But this is like my intuitive perception when I work with people. So I would say your subconscious mind to a large extent forms your energy field. Now, what we need to understand is a couple of things. First off, accessing your subconscious mind requires accessing a different brainwave state. This is why when we're saying we cannot access our subconscious mind, like when we're talking right now, the two of us, we are in probably like a low beta brainwave. So that means that our groups of neurons in the brain are oscillating at about probably 15, 20 hertz. So these are brain waves where huge numbers of neurons are simultaneously getting activated and deactivated in waves, right? And then it creates a frequency pattern that you can record with something like EEG, for example. Now, this is the conscious mind. This is when we're focused. This is when we're having a conversation with someone, when we're attentive, right? High beta is stress. So this is very much where we get that tunnel vision when we're hyper fixated on something. And that's pumping our cortisol, adrenaline. Unfortunately, a lot of people today spend a lot of time in high beta, which is very taxing on the body. Now, the next one is alpha. Alpha, it happens at about 7 to 15 hertz. So it's a slower brainwave. And this is relaxation. This is if you're like just relaxing, maybe doing some art, listening to some music. And that's a great space for getting inspiration, for getting great ideas. And then the next one is theta. So theta is at about 4 to 7 hertz. So it's even slower. Theta occurs naturally when we're falling asleep. So when you're in that state, you know, where sometimes you're in between like awake and asleep, or if you sometimes wake up and you are aware that you're dreaming, but you're still dreaming, that's theta. And then the next one is delta, and delta is 0 to 4 hertz. Delta is extremely slow. And this happens in either unconscious deep sleep or extremely deep states of meditation. So if we're reading about monks who reach the state where their heart basically stops, their breathing stops, but they're still totally fine and aware and they experience complete oneness, that's deep delta in awake state. That takes extreme amounts of training to achieve, but it is possible. And so this is basically what we need to understand. We have there's gamma and all this, but that's not relevant for this conversation. And so what is important to understand is that during different periods of our life, these different brainwave states are predominant. So from conception to about 2 years, delta is predominant. This is when the child does not understand that they're separate from their mom, which means that in the womb and during the first 2 years of your life, anything that was happening, the child absorbs. So a lot of the time when I work with my clients and we go back, a lot of their early traumas, that's the tricky part about things like why I believe therapy can only take us so far. You don't remember it. You cannot access it consciously because it's even pre-memory formation. Now your subconscious mind records everything. Everything's there. So you can access it, but you need to slow down your brainwave. And I would say at those stages, it can be beneficial to work with someone who has some intuitive abilities to see that maybe. I work with a lot of teachers who can see things I cannot see because oftentimes for ourselves, we don't see things as well as for others. And I'm quite good at picking up on these things for my clients as well. But I will be shown, for example, things that happened when they were in the womb. And it's always why it's so good to, if you have the ability to have a conversation with your parents about what they were going through when your mom was pregnant, like what their relationship was like, were there a lot of struggles with money, etc. These are extremely valuable pieces of information and what can be extremely traumatic for some humans and they don't even know is if, for example, their parents attempted an abortion or they didn't really want the child. The child absolutely absorbs all of that. So these can be extremely huge experiences that you have no awareness of, and then you're carrying that in your subconscious your entire life, and it's going to affect absolutely every facet. So this is why the subconscious work, it can be extremely tender, extremely vulnerable, extremely deep, but ultimately it helps resolve these things at a very deep level. And then we move into theta from about, I think it's about 2 to, I want to say 5 or something. It depends a little bit on an individual. And then we go into alpha. And then I think it's at around 10 or 11 years old that we start being able to shift into beta. I actually think theta's until we're 7. But there's a little bit of, depending on who you ask, is a bit different, and kids are also different. And this is when kids are predominantly in theta, that's when kids have this incredible imagination. The kid will pick up a broom, and that broom will legitimately be a horse for that kid. They'll be going around riding it. And it's that. There's this insane imagination. This is why also children see more things. Children see ghosts. Children have perception that then adults tell them, no, this is not real. But is it?
Yeah.
And during that time, especially in delta theta, we're just absorbing. We don't have this discernment that happens when we start going into beta, that we can start having this, like, this is mine, this isn't mine, right? It's like ego beginning to mature. Kids don't have that before, which is why everything their parents are saying, like the sentences, how they're treating them, is just getting programmed. This is why it's called programming. It's really like they're writing software into you, like your nervous system, your everything, all of this is hardware. And then all the beliefs, all the ways of being, this is software, right? And I really think of it as code. If anyone who's listening to that has ever done any programming, subconscious really works kind of, if this, then that, if X, then Y. And it has all of these conditions on what is safe, what is going to make me feel accepted, what is going to make me belong, what is going to prevent punishment, what is going to give me a reward. It's like all of these conditions, and that's all there. And then we normally forget about all of that, or we are not aware how much impact it had. And then the issue that happens is that the way these things then manifest later down the line can be quite a few steps downstream. That we may get triggered by something in a personal relationship or business. A client, I don't know, we're having a conversation with a potential client and they ghost us. And all of a sudden that creates this massive emotional response that is totally disproportionate. Or we're running a masterclass and only one person shows up, and we experience that as the biggest rejection in the world. And we start questioning everything we're doing. Are we meant for this? Even though the event itself doesn't mean anything. If anything, it's normal at the beginning of business, right? But this is because it's highlighting an imprint that is in your subconscious there from much, much earlier on. And this is where I would say most entrepreneurs, their businesses don't work because of that, not because of strategy. Strategy is not hard. And I'm going to say this, I run a 6-figure business with extremely simple strategy. I always say this, like my strategy is, I call it so basic bitch. It does not get more basic bitch than that. I haven't even run like a masterclass or anything in a long time. I do things when I feel like doing it. I show up on social media maybe 3-4 times a week. And granted, I have extremely satisfied clientele, so I get a lot of referrals, a lot of resigns. That's being good at what you do is going to do miracles.
That helps, yeah.
I would recommend being really good at what you do, right? But I don't do ads. I've never done any, maybe one day, but I don't even think about it because it's really not about that, right? And I always say people, if you love strategy, go do it. Because if it lights you up and it gives you like this feeling of, oh my God, this is so exciting, I want to learn all of this, which I know some people who are like that, by all means, knock yourself out. Incredible. Me? Nah. Like that's not what I'm spending my time on. It's not why I'm here. And it's really not necessary. And it's important to have this understanding of what really determines 95% of your success in every area of your life. And I would say if this is where your struggles lie, you're probably going to benefit a lot more from, instead of learning more strategy, working with someone who can help you move through these things. Because then all of a sudden, any strategy you use, it's going to work. And if something doesn't work, who cares? You're going to pivot and move on, right? But if you don't address this part, you can cycle and use 50 different strategies and it's not going to work.
Self-belief and conviction and being good at your job.
Like and I'm going to say, like, I think this is a very underrated part because And I'm not going to say as a business coach that it's necessarily your job to check that people are good at what they do, but we should start having more conversation. I'm very much a proponent of very if you go on my social, I don't market and sell directly a lot. I normally teach, I normally share what I'm thinking about, and then I'm going to sell on my stories directly when I feel like it. I'm very much like that. I'm not very conventional in the way I do these things. But we are having there's so much marketing around trying to convince people there are quick fixes, that they can reach some success super fast, all of this. But there isn't enough emphasis on, are you actually really good at what you do? Are you, also, in my opinion, while I understand that maybe early on in business, there may be a period where it's necessary for you to invest primarily in business honing skills, like honing your business skills. That's it. I think it's a huge problem that we have people who invest for 3, 4, 5 years, mostly in learning how to do marketing and strategy rather than investing in what they're doing. We have people investing tens of thousands in having someone to mentor them with strategy they don't even need, instead of having a mentor for getting really good at what it is they do.
Do you think, just really quickly on that note, do you think it's an awareness thing? Do you think that if you were to improve your awareness with yourself and the niche that you're in, naturally that will open up more opportunities into your business?
I deeply believe that.
Yeah.
I deeply believe that. And I would say, I also don't think it's not about that. For me, if your mission here, if your business is your mission, this is why I always say, I only work with people for whom their businesses are their mission. I cannot help someone who just wants to make money. I don't know how to, because all my teachings and everything I do are built on the assumption that this is your life work. This is you're here to serve, right? Yeah. So if that's not there, I don't know how to help you. It's not even that I wouldn't want to. I just don't know how to, because my beliefs and assumptions are so different. Yeah. But if you're here because this is your mission and you have a really big why that's in integrity, that's your responsibility. This is, we could say, why God sent you here. So do your due diligence and actually fulfill your assignment, right? Yeah. Rather than and the problem is, and I'm just going to call it out here. Yeah. The problem is that most business coaches, because they're business coaches, are just very fucking good at marketing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, especially early on, fall for good marketing. Yeah. And they don't have, again, especially if you're selling a magic pill, like you're going to be jumping from one thing to another, seeking for that other one. And that for sure is the self-awareness thing. But we do have to call it a spade and also say that there are a lot of people who don't exactly go out of their way to correct that assumption for new business owners and say, actually, you don't need this work, right? Which I've done this before, right? I've said this publicly on my site. I'm like, no one needs my work. You don't need me. You can sort all of that stuff out yourself, right? This is where you can benefit from this, but you don't need me. Please don't come into my spaces from a place of, Alja's going to save you, urgency, all this. We're not going to have a good time, right? And so I think understanding these different dynamics and how people make decisions. And this is why I moved away from using a lot of buyer psychology, because a lot of buyer psychology actually preys on subconscious scarcity and doubt, and is trying to actually extract and use that to make the person make a choice. And sometimes it can be useful. I think it's always important to use it to address objections, to clearly articulate stuff. But we should be aware that if we get someone into our spaces and programs from a place of scarcity, just because that person is now in our program and they paid us, that's not going anywhere. So either you as a mentor need to be able to address that and transform with them, or you're probably going to have behind the scenes problems. Which is, I always tell people, my biggest flex in business is not the money I make, but that I literally have 0 unhappy clients. I've never had an unhappy client. I have no drama behind the scenes. I have the most easeful business really in the back end because I don't do any of that. My clients know exactly what they're going to. There's no coercion, no pressure, no force. I don't chase after anyone. I'm like, when you're all in, come, let's do this. We're going to have the best time. I'm not available for, I don't care if I could make a few extra 10K a year. It's not a point, right? And I think the understanding also for me, the understanding the subconscious helped me build my business in that way, in a way that actually creates ease and spaciousness and flow, but also satisfaction on both sides, which is to me like the most important part.
Do you think that's why you've had the success that you've had? You're showing up and you're real, you're honest.
Yeah, and I get that all the time. Yeah.
And is it referral work? Is that how a client would find if you're not doing any? Advertising?
I do advertise. Like,
you do advertising as well?
I do it, but like for me, it's like this. If you go, the best thing is to find my Instagram. I'm most active there. I don't do a lot of direct selling, right? I'm very much, I teach, I share ideas, right?
Yeah.
I speak about things the way I see them, what I see in my client sessions. And I really create my content. I always think about like, how can I create content that's going to serve the person on the other side from my current level of awareness. I don't adhere to any marketing frameworks or stuff like this. I just do talking head videos and I share a lot of things. And I think a part of it is that I am naturally a teacher. I have a lot of knowledge. I think I have a lot of insight. As we said, like I am good at what I do, right?
Yeah.
And I do think for a lot of people, they go and do way more structured marketing that is necessary because some other foundations are missing. Maybe because they don't have thought leadership, maybe because they're afraid of being fully authentic. And then they, again, it's what we were talking, like how business is not going to allow you to hide. They try to hide behind frameworks. They try to hide behind 3-step, whatever, right? I don't have that problem. I've done enough work that I show up, I speak my truth. I tell people like I'm very real. I normally show up without makeup, like all this stuff. I just am who I am, right? And I would say, I think people can feel from my side as well that I care about people, that I'm not sharing from a place of ego. I'm not, and this is what I mean. This is why inner work and subconscious work is so important, because also I have a free membership. We're probably going to put that in the show notes. And I have a Telegram channel there where it's just a free podcast and I talk about different topics. But I did I think it's a 40-minute podcast in there about how I handle haters online, because I have a pretty big following. I think I have a little bit over 35,000 followers and I get a lot of interaction with my posts, right? And the way I said was like, if you want to minimize hate, quote unquote, online, there's obviously a lot that can be done, but a huge part of responsibility is on you. Because if you're showing up from an energy that is aggressive, that is proving that I need to be right, like all this, don't be surprised when you get that same mirroring on the other side, right? A lot of people are going and they're like, oh, if they're like haters, it's about them, it's not about you. No, hold on. That's not true, right? So what's the intent behind posting? Are you actually serving or not? What's the energy you're showing up from? Can people feel your love and care for them? And then is your articulation accurate, right? Because if you actually tick all of these boxes, then any hate you get on the other side is going to be a projection, because you haven't done anything to elicit it, and you can have very clear discernment. This is mine, this isn't mine, right? So for example, like last time I posted something, I talk a lot about the matrix, the systems, like this, and I talked about how I find it very curious how what we would call the elites love using the injections. I've seen in the energy fields of people how injections, they leave a form of branding. It just is what it is. And how one of the first things when we come into the world, because biologically speaking, injection is a violation of all the boundaries that we have.
Hold on. Can I just stop you there for a second? When you say injections, what do you mean by that exactly?
I'm talking literally just any injection, right? So it's a violation of a biological boundary, right? The body's not designed to have anything injected there. And I'm not going to say there may not be time and space for that to be the only way. But the reason why we inject anything into the body is to bypass all of the natural boundaries.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think it's a very interesting from a conceptual perspective that you're born and within hours, the first thing that the system does is violates all of your boundaries, right?
So many as well. My goodness, so a child, I don't think needs that many. I don't know. Can we even say the V word? I'm scared that it might.
Let's just use the V word. But for the sake of it, I think what's interesting here, what happened immediately is I wasn't even talking about the V. Because the first thing that normally the kids get is actually vitamin K. Right? So I was literally talking very specifically in that video about the injection, and everything that was related to that was about that, right? And when you then went into the comments, and there were hundreds of comments, almost every single person started having this big go about the V, pro or against. And I was like, you guys are so interesting, because nowhere in this video did I ever use the word V, and nothing about what I talked about is about that. I have a lot of opinions on that, but that's a separate convo. And that if you're actually mindful about content creation, you know where you're coming from and the intention, you're going to see this so clearly. You're not going to get into unnecessary arguments. You're going to see immediately where people are projecting their own triggers onto the conversation. It saves you a lot of freaking time. Saves you a lot of freaking time.
I love that, because I've been, not with my business, but outside of my business, I think more on a personal note, I've been really struggling with that, where And that word discernment has been coming up so much for me lately, is you need to have discernment, know who you are as a person, really understand yourself, lead with empathy, be a good person, have your discernment, and then whatever backlash you get off the back of who you are and how you're showing up is just, it's going to be water off a duck's back. It's not going to sting as much as it would otherwise. And I think that you phrased that so eloquently, and it's exactly what I needed to hear more than you realize. So you have no idea, actually, especially with a few things that are happening at the moment. But I also think, without going too far off topic, actually, I'm going to go there because I think that this is also another really interesting topic to discuss. What if, and not so much the comments online, you're going to get the trolls, and everything that you said is a great way to manage and to view that. But personally, when you start, now I want to cross over into timeline collapsing and frequency, increasing your frequency and reaching your fullest potential. Naturally, as you start to do the inner work and you start to grow and you start to get more into alignment, the people that are no longer on your path, or if you're going to another level, not everyone can come with you, and naturally people start to fall off. Sometimes those relationships don't end so well, and things can be said and done in a way that can be quite hurtful. And then you think to yourself, what am I doing wrong? And why is my whole world collapsing? Tell me about that, and how collapsing timelines, raising frequencies, reaching new heights. How does that all work? Is it okay to be feeling this way? Is it a sign that we're growing, that we're heading in the right direction? Or is it a combination of checking in with yourself, again, having your discernment, making sure that you're a good person? There's a few questions that I'm asking that I've really loaded you up with all the things that I want to know, but you get where I'm going with this.
I actually think you're asking a really important question. And I want to just start with this, and we're going to go into the whole timeline part. But one of the questions I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm hearing this correctly, or if it's just something I'm hearing because I've been thinking a lot about it recently, is what are the things that are showing us we're actually moving in the right direction? Because I think it's one of the most important things to ask. I think a lot about this because I've been recently, especially since the release of the Epstein files, so I work with a lot with energy clearing, with the subconscious work. And I've been getting a lot of clients with a lot of very dark stuff. And I've been recently guided in, God has mysterious ways, but starting to learn the basics of deliverance work, which is basically exorcism, and understanding the levels of demonic influence and stuff I never thought I would be reading about. But what it makes you really start questioning is like, what are the things we worship? What are the things we are placing as the goal? I personally think this is the most important question we need to ask ourselves, because if anyone who's read the Bible will know that one of the things that is, of course, one of the first commandments is worship one God, right? That's it. Don't have multiple gods. Don't have idolatry. Today's world has a lot of idolatry, right? And the biggest one probably in this industry and in the business world is money. And there has been a lot of entanglement between, there's been this crazy entanglement that happened. And it's a nuanced topic. My God, it's a nuanced topic. But we tend to follow people because they're making a lot of money and we want to learn from them. And a lot of these people teach energy, they teach frequency. Just because someone's making a lot of money doesn't mean they're a spiritually evolved person, even if they're talking about these things. There's a lot of deception. There's a lot of what we could call false light. There's a lot of stuff. There are a lot of people in this industry that I have very strong opinions about what attachments they have and what entities they are, we could say, probably possessed by, to be honest, at this point. But I think, to me, the important thing is always to return back to like, what are those things that really showcase that someone's doing the work? To me, is kindness. It's love. It's compassion. It's care. It's what you said, being a good human. And I think for me, it's always returning back to that, right? Like, and I think Saint Paul called them the fruits of the spirit or something like this, right? And I'm going back to reading the Bible since like learning about deliverance, because I'm like, I think I need to understand this at a deeper level than when I was a kid. But it's giving this as the indicator someone's actually moving in the right direction. I've seen this with myself. Like, there's more lightness there. And of course, joy. Joy is one of the indicators. Love, joy, kindness. There's a lot more lightness in someone's energy. So I would say, to me, that's always, I call this virtue. That's always for me what is the guidelines are moving towards there, right? It's not money, it's not status, it's not. I believe that if you're moving in alignment with your soul, if you're in alignment with God, if you're in alignment, if you're the follower of Christ with Christ, and if you believe that, it'll be taken care of. Everything will be taken care of. All of your needs will be met. Your desires will be met, and some extra. You don't have to worry about that. I don't think about those things. I tell people I don't have money goals. I don't reverse engineer about how I'm going to have a certain launch, make X amount of money. I don't even manifest anymore. Personally, I don't actually do this anymore. I move in alignment with what I would call raising your frequency, which is embodying more and more virtue, which really in a lot of ways we could say is coming closer to organic source consciousness, organic source frequency. That's the most important thing. Now, you were talking about relationships before. Yeah, not every relationship will come to the new level with you, right? So the way I understand reality is like that. In a lot of ways, it's a holographic projection that we are rendering reality into existence, and that it is our vibration and our subconscious beliefs and assumptions that are behind that. And when you change that, your reality is going to change. And at this point, I have so much proof for that in my life that it's going to be, I think, quite difficult to convince me otherwise. Although, as I always say, that may change the way I understand it. But not all of your relationships will move to that next level with you, because free will is, absolute, and everybody can choose their own path. And I do believe that you mentioned before some relationships not ending in the nicest way. I think that is optional to a huge extent with doing more work. So I've seen that a lot of drama in the relationships is extremely avoidable. And it's when there's quite a lot of unprocessed trauma, unprocessed rejection, unprocessed resentment, lack of forgiveness. That's really what it is. And not necessarily towards that person, but that person may be bringing forward the dynamic that is coming from older times in your life. If that original dynamic hasn't been addressed, things can end in quite a tumultuous way. I have personally found that, especially in the more recent years, I don't really have any relationships that have a lot of drama in them anymore at all. And most of the relationships that ended very naturally without any particular drama. And I would say that's because I've done a lot of work around clearing any attack, clearing any strong conflict programming that I had a lot of from growing up. So I think a lot of that can change, but it is important to understand that, when you go to new levels, things will fall away.
Do you think some people can get shocked by the level at which and the speed at which you're growing, and that for them is a massive fear trigger, which is exactly what happened essentially? Really strong friendship for many years, literally zero drama in that particular friendship and relationship, but it was seeing someone changing, and that person being myself, and no longer fitting into the box that I had been placed in, and that change happening rapidly at a speed that even they weren't expecting, and it was a massive shock factor. Fear got triggered, and then it's, oh my goodness, can't have this. And it's just not can't have this. I don't know what they were thinking, but the response was not one that I think any of us were expecting. I know I wasn't expecting.
Of course. Yeah, you're going to trigger people. That's the thing, because normally when you're growing in any area of your life, you become a mirror for them of what's possible. When this is done for someone else, like when we see someone who has what we actually want or is where we want to be, there are only two ways there are two decisions we can make. Either we move towards that ourselves, we admit to ourselves we actually want this, and in that case it's normally wise to ask that person how they got there, find maybe some advice on their side, or we choose not to move towards that. But what that means is there's going to be an inner friction that is saying, I actually like this, I want this. And then the part of us that wants to stay where we are, and then we have to justify that. We have to justify why we're not actually moving towards what we want. Very few people have the self-awareness to say, I actually know I want this, but because of my comfort, I'm choosing not to do this.
Can I ask you a question? Is it because of my comfort, I'm choosing not to do this? Or is it more because I'm fearful of the relationships and that I will lose and the life that will change and how that's going to disrupt everything, my environment, essentially? And do you think people self-sabotage?
Absolutely. So when I say comfort, let's reframe this. Let's say comfort zone. And what comfort zone means is the known, right? So your subconscious mind is the way the subconscious mind works, the way that the brain works. Your brain is a prediction machine, right? It's constantly predicting what's going to happen in your environment because that's the way to keep you safe. And so what that means is basically it's constantly informing the next thing that it thinks is going to happen based on your past experience. That's very important. The subconscious can only predict based on the past. So it means the past is always going to be familiar. And thus you know how to handle it, even though it may suck, right? But you know how to do with that. If you've been poor your entire life, you know exactly how to cope with poverty. But actually suddenly having a lot of money, and then the question is like, what does that bring with it? How does that, what you said, how does it affect my relationships? What is the responsibility it brings with it? The new things I need to learn? That's the unknown, right? We don't know what happens there. And so the subconscious immediately goes, ooh, not safe, challenging. And so this is what the comfort zone is. And the comfort zone is just what you know, what is known to you. And this is what gets triggered, right? There is like somewhere in the subconscious mind, there will be imprints activated that say, if you go where this person is, or if you go to this new direction, like everything is going to fall apart. Something along those lines, right? It's again, individual. Like maybe people are not going to accept you. You're going to lose your family. You're going to lose your friends. And a lot of people will, especially if you don't have the awareness of how these things work, you are just going to straight up reject that, right? But then the way you're going to justify that to yourself is you're normally going to make the other person a villain, right? If that makes sense. So let's say your friend, right? She's going to be looking at this. She may be liking in terms of what you're doing, where you're going. There may be a part of her that's, oh, I want this as well. I want more freedom. I want more money. I want all of this. But there's a part of her that knows that the choices she would need to make to get there would be uncomfortable. And so instead of taking responsibility and saying, I just don't want, I don't want to say I don't want it enough, but like, I'm not ready to make that step and be okay with that. She's going to say, no, there's something wrong with what you are doing, so that she can then justify to herself why she's not moving in that direction. And
so how long does it then take for an individual to create new patterns, habits, views? How long does it take for one to recondition? Because you mentioned the subconscious only understands the past. It doesn't understand the future. So how do we then reprogram the mind, and how long do we need to sit with that to be comfortable in creating the future the subconscious is not aware, the subconscious doesn't yet understand? What does that look like? Because that's really uncomfortable. But how long does it stay uncomfortable for? Does it differ based on the person and the conditioning?
Yes. So yes, absolutely. It's going to be different for every person. So the important thing is not that, you need to rewire every experience that happened in the past. These experiences in the past, they formed beliefs. They formed your deepest assumptions about reality. So for example, money is difficult to make, or like people don't care about what I have to say. No matter what I say, it doesn't matter. People are not going to listen to me. So there's a couple of elements here. How long it takes, I would say, depends hugely on the extent and depth of experience or trauma that formed those things. So the deeper the trauma was, the stronger normally there is the emotion that is still present in our field, right? And that means that the experience, like that, when the subconscious belief is triggered, is going to trigger a nervous system response that is very strong. So this is what happens. Self-sabotage is not like, it's not really sabotage. It's your subconscious trying to keep you safe. Now, what happens is that the way I think about it is that there is like this imprint somewhere in your field, right? A belief, a thought form. And then a situation happens, like you have to show up. Let's say you have a belief, like a really nasty one I had to work with was like, no matter what I do, it won't work anyways. Because I was raised in an environment where there were extremely high expectations. And I was oftentimes punished for not achieving those expectations. And no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I worked for it, eventually always reached a point where there was punishment or some form of this. So I developed this belief. It was associated with a lot of defeat, right? That like, It just didn't matter. I could try really hard. I could do everything right. And it still wouldn't get me to what I desired, which was this feeling of safety and stability. And of course, that was massive in my business. I had to work through this, because what happens is you may show up on social media. It may be the kind of thing where you start with a lot of momentum and you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited. Let me do these things. Then it may not work the first few times. And then all of a sudden, this belief will kick up. And it'll be like, it doesn't matter anyways. What's going to happen in your nervous system is your nervous system is going to go into this freeze shutdown response, where you're going to get confusion. You're going to get brain fog. You're going to have no inspiration. You're going to feel that everything's pointless. You're probably going to stop showing up. You're going to stop speaking about what you're doing. And you're going to have no idea, right? And you may even believe, like, there may be even these specific thoughts that come up of it's not going to work out anyways, but they feel so real in that moment, right? So this is how it works. So it goes the imprint, the situation triggering, then triggers the nervous system response, which triggers the action, the behavior, right? And how strong that is, it's going to depend on how deep these beliefs go, how deep the trauma was, how much emotion is stored there, and how much of your identity is built around that. So for some of the beliefs we have, it's very easy to get rid of them, right? A lot of the mindset work is really about awareness. It's showing a lot of the money mindset work is like giving you awareness that you have certain beliefs that are not serving you. Now, if these beliefs don't have a lot of emotional charge associated with them, and if you don't have a huge identity built around them, you may be able to just become aware of it and be like, oh, I don't want this anymore. You let go of it. However, the reason why most people don't actually see sustainable results with just mindset work, because the reality is most people don't, is because they won't address these deeper core, what we could call them imprints, traumas. And those will require you working with the emotion and releasing the emotion. And it's going to require you, it really depends. The way I work, like I've worked with this for long enough to now be at a level where I deeply believe that there are certain points of pain and trauma that require God to step in. Because there's
I'm seeing that. I'm starting to see that.
Yeah.
I was actually
saying, cannot do it yourself.
Let go and let God is what I say. I'm at the point where the more you surrender, I feel like there's a higher intelligence and force and power that knows so much more, obviously, than we know. And it's in surrendering where you start to see the magic. But I think the problem with so many people, not everyone, but with many, is they don't have a strong enough relationship with the creator. So how can you fully surrender and give all your trust to the unknown?
Yeah. And that's it. That requires cultivation of that. It requires building faith, right? It's the reason why faith is such a big component of, I would say, most religion and definitely manifestation work. Even if you're just studying basic manifestation work, faith is a prerequisite, right? What is it called? Faith is the proof of things not yet seen, right? I think that's somewhere in Matthew. I don't know the exact verse, but somewhere in the Bible. And it's it requires faith, but it's also, there's a level of, I would say, grace that is also required with some of this, because I think a lot of the spiritual community, there's a lot of this, oh, you have to mute all of your own needs and you have to do all the healing with the trauma. But there, like, trauma, ultimately, when we get to the deepest level, in my opinion, is where there was separation from God that happened, from this oneness that we're all looking to return back to. So that forms such deep pain that this needs to be, it's like mending. And to me, from what I've seen, this is where actually we need something greater. We need the love of God, the love of Christ, if the person's Christian, to come in and actually heal that, because we cannot do it ourselves, because some of these wounds are actually so deep that there's no mindset, there's no thing, it goes beyond all of these things. There's a soul level, and there's a soul level break sometimes that happens. So that requires the deepest level of faith. And I think in some ways, this is when people talk about in Bible being saved and stuff like that, I think this is in some way what they are referring to, that there are certain things that we don't have the power to simply do ourselves. It has to be like a greater force that comes in. And I've seen this with myself and some clients, that sometimes there are certain wounds that I can intellectually understand that the way I formed that belief is not true, but I don't have access to that being healed yet. And there is a a request, faith, like a prayer to something greater to be like, show me how to heal that back into wholeness. I don't know how to do this. This is so painful. It is so deep. It is beyond me.
I was about to ask you that. How does someone that hasn't grown up in a religious or spiritual household find their way back to that? Because the conditioning in the world today is everywhere. It's in our music, which is also hypnotic. It's everywhere. Movies, episodes. And I've seen the change as it started to happen, even with your subscription TV. I'm like, wait, hold on a second. There he is. They're pushing a narrative here. This is clear. Whoa. This is even in kids shows now. So if it's in the TV, if it's on the TV, if it's on the internet, it's in the music, it's everywhere we turn if we get onto this. How does one, and if you haven't been raised or you're not surrounded by the right people, how do you find your way back to source, but yet you're out there in the world, whether it's building a business or whether it's in life in general, and you're struggling and you need that help? What do you do?
I think the reality is most of us are brought there by our own personal struggles, because we can call it demonic influence, because it actually is. When you study demonic kingdoms, you start understanding a lot of this is unfortunately just demonic influence. Even, I know it sounds extreme, but I'm not using in this, everything's demonic. It's just, there are demonic kingdoms out there. It just is what it is. Demons look to cause a lot of suffering and pain and eventually even kill a person. And there are legalities and frameworks and systems behind it. You have to give them free will to participate, but unfortunately giving them consent to participate is not like, they don't come with a contract to sign. Very rarely do they come with they do.
Yes, they do. I was going to say, no, they do. In some parts of the world, in some industries.
In some industries, and for a lot of our ancestors did blood sacrifices. Blood sacrifices are covenants to the demonic forces, right? Which is why a lot of what we saw with the Epstein files, like with worshipping of Moloch, Baal, with a lot of Masonic orders and stuff. Like, I hope this won't be taken down because of this. I apologize. You can beep it out, these words.
Oh no, I want this in. I hope it's not taken out. This is the best part.
These are covenants. These are covenants with these forces, and they give these forces legal rights to they think they own a bloodline. It's a bloodline. It's not just that person. That's the more I'm studying this, the more I'm like, oh no, this is so much worse than I thought. I never in my life thought I would end up studying these things. And I was like, cool, subconscious. And now here I am broken up contracts to Baal. But they think they own the bloodline. And what happens is then that they don't automatically have the permission to cause disease and suffering and torment and pain in our life, but we need to give them permission. And unfortunately, permission slips for this is a lot. Again, this is according to the Bible, right? I'm not claiming all of this is true. Things like witchcraft, which is very prevalent in New Age, a lot of music, movies, any sort of sexual content, like kids seeing, things that kids shouldn't be seeing. This opens up the doors. And so if there's like a bloodline covenant that allows for these things, then that gives that entity a permission to come in. Also substances, huge, right? So for me, starting to learn these things totally redefined. I used to be a person who's like, there is no sin.
Oh, there's sin.
I started understanding sin was the deviation from
That's
the
how it comes in.
order. It opens up these doors. And out of it really redefined my understanding of God's love. Because I was like, why would God not allow us to do things? I was like, that makes no sense. And then I was like, oh shit.
I know. That's what I say to all my friends. I'm like, guys, you don't understand. It's not that God doesn't want you to enjoy certain things. It's that he understands the power behind it. And that's how sin can enter. But
it's not that God is going to punish you and throw you into hell. It's that you are opening yourself up to forces that cause hell in your life. And I'm starting to really explore and see how many of the things we're experiencing, like the disease and relationships falling apart. And a lot of these are results of bloodline curses that come from these entities. The problem is what you were referring to before, that a lot of things I never understood. I always thought I'm a big fan of Harry Potter. I loved it as a kid. But when I started reading a lot of deliverance stuff, they were like, yeah, we don't recommend reading this, because a lot of these things, and even kids shows today, they're portraying a lot of witchcraft as being something really fun. And then it plants these ideas that is much more likely for people to go and engage in that. And spell work that's very, because in the Bible, depending on the translations you're looking at, there are very few things that are explicitly condemned, but spell throwing, witchcraft is one, necromancy, mediumship, channeling. I started staying away from all the channeling. I used to do it, and now I'm taking a break from all of this, because no one can give you a guarantee what the heck they're actually channeling. You know what I mean? What is the thing you're listening to? And so a lot of these things are priming, and some of it is directly just bringing dark frequency. And I remember I watched a few years ago, I don't have Netflix, I don't have TV, I don't watch Netflix. I very rarely watch any of these things, but two things I'm going to mention as just food for thought. One is a personal experience, and the other one's something I've been thinking about recently. I'm getting a ringing in my right ear as I'm saying this. Can I please get interference removed? Thanks, guys. Okay. They don't want me to talk about this. Okay, I love it. A few years ago, wow, this is strong.
They don't want you to talk about this. Wait, hold on. Who is they?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to.
Okay, yeah.
We're not going to. Yeah. A few years ago, I was watching, I don't know, did you watch the Netflix series Dark? Very big. It's a German one, and it was huge. Right. And I don't watch horror movies. I never watched anything like this. But I was in Germany at the time, and I really wanted to improve my German. So I was like, with my ex back then, I was like, hey, let's watch some stuff in German so I can practice that, and it's kind of absorbing the language. People were raving about that show, and it was gripping in a way like you couldn't stop watching. But it was one of the darkest and most vile things. And we were going towards the end of season 1. It was maybe 2 or 3 episodes. That two things were happening that I luckily had experience with energy work already at the time. That must have been, I don't know, I want to say 2022, maybe 2023. I'm not 2022 more like. And I felt at the same time, I felt how dark this was, but it was also, I couldn't stop. It was addictive. And I was like, there is something very wrong. And we were, I think, about 3 episodes before the end of season 1. And I was like, we are not touching this. And I had to do full scale clearing of the whole place and everything, because the energy residue that left inside the flat, I was like, it was horrendous, and I couldn't stop. It was like, my mind was like, need to watch this.
Wow.
So they are using some of these things to directly remember. I don't think I mentioned this. When you're watching TV, you're directly accessing the subconscious. Your brain actually goes into alpha theta. So you're bypassing the conscious mind. This is why they used to use subliminal messaging back in the days officially. They still are. They're programming.
Yeah, they still are.
Called TV program for a reason.
I've heard that they place spells, or they do some sort of witchcraft or magic stuff on the show, with the show. So when you're watching it, they're in your living room.
Yes.
They've come into your house, and
they're opening the portals.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the first time when I really experienced that. And luckily, I think I managed to really cleanse all of that out, even though I was pretty an amateur compared to now in that. So that was like my first, I would say, real experience where I was like, I'm not touching anything like that. But the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently is Twilight. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I haven't watched them, to be honest. I think I watched 1 episode or 2.
But here's the thing. And I was thinking about it because Twilight came to my mind for a couple of different reasons. First off, Twilight was a massive obsession when I was finishing middle school. So I must have been like 13, 14. Everybody was obsessed, including me back then, right? And when you think about, there are 2 things. First one is that Twilight is objectively terrible. The storyline, the writing, like everything is bad. Like I went and reread it later on because I was like, I want to understand what was so gripping about that back then. And I was reading it. I was like, this is terrible. Okay, this is terrible. Like none about this is good. There's no part about that. And yet it had this spell-like grip on the entire generation. And now let's think about what is the content of that. We got vampires, soulless beings who drink blood. Anyone. Of course, we know I don't know if everybody knows it, but if you follow anything, you may know what's happening in Hollywood, right? The rituals. If you follow what's in the files, you will know that rituals. So we're having blood drinking shapeshifters. Hello. who have no souls, hello, doing these things. Now, what was really fascinating to me was where in the final movie, Twilight, basically that person has a baby with a vampire or whatever. And I was just like, why is that baby like CGI? That's not a real baby. And apparently it was because when they tried to put the real baby on the set, that baby, he couldn't stand Kristen Stewart. She couldn't hold him. Because reptilians can't do this.
Do you think she is? Do you think she is?
They all have reptilian attachments, 100%. Like the top level Hollywood that you don't get. Look at them; they're empty. Look at how much it drains these people. Look at like how down the line in their careers, it's like she has no soul in her eyes. There's a reason why she has no personality.
Do you think she started off as a normal human, and then do they clone them at some point, and then they become half, and now she's fully? Or something I find really strange. I'm like, they come out of normal suburbs. They seem like normal people trying to make it in Hollywood, and then they start changing the way they look and acting. Look at Britney, for example. What happened to her?
That's MK Ultra, right?
Wow.
That's Britney's MK Ultra. A lot of those Disney and all that's programming like this. It's so sad. It is so sad. A lot of these young kids that come, I was like the other day really quite devastated. I don't know. Do you know the singer Aurora by any chance?
Aurora. Yes, I do.
She's a Norwegian. She's a Norwegian singer. And I love her music, but this was for me such an example. Also, people just need to wake up. I discovered her before she got big. So I was in my first year of university when I found her. I used to work as a photographer for some music websites and magazines back in the days. And I was subscribed to these sites that they would send you, it was called a song a day, probably still exists, but they sent you these different artists, but also new up and coming ones. So her song came and it was a very unique way of music and all this. And she had a show in Shoreditch in London, which was really in a hotel basement. There were maybe 50 people there. Super cool. I went with my friend, loved it. And then she went really big, probably about a year after. And next time, I think 2 years after I saw her again in London, she was playing Shepherd's Bush, like huge, obviously upgrade. Yeah. Point being that this kid at the time, she started writing these songs when she was supposedly 9-10 years old. And she comes across as this light. She has this very etheric, fairy-like music, but the lyrics are dark. The lyrics are about death. The lyrics are about suicide. The lyrics are about murder, really dark things, supposedly being written by a kid who's 9-10 years old. And then you start looking at her. There's a picture of her. I think that was of her. That was not, when I looked at her, and then Greta Thunberg as well, which also sad, but I think that was of her. And there's a picture of her with her parents and her sister. And both her and her sister, who are maybe 4 or 5 years old, are covering one eye in that picture. And that means the parents were handlers. The parents basically made contracts with this straight away. And these kids, they go in, they're given to these societies for programming. And I was also like, then you see people justifying on these like different forums. And there's a lot of her first album. First of all, it's called All My Demons Greeting Me as a Friend, from a 16-year-old. Help me. And she's wrapped up like a butterfly. And of course, the major MK Ultra program is called the Monarch, right? And there's symbols everywhere in the music videos. It's really sad. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But to me, it's crazy because you go on these websites and you have all these people on YouTube and after commenting how, no, there's just artistic expression. And I'm like, artistic expression of a 9-year-old singing about, she said,
I don't see it. It's crazy how programmed they are.
I had a great childhood. I'm like, a kid with a great childhood is not singing about the darkest things and writing this kind of age. It just doesn't fly. The math doesn't math. And with a lot of these, their nervous systems are fried. They have some sort of, they're really ungrounded. They're like speaking like this. Or if you look at someone like Greta as well, it's empty, frankly. This is not, we have to ask ourselves why, we label them neurodivergent and autistic, but is that really it? Because that's what trauma looks like. And I think for some of these kids, like the parents, they have in advance already contracts and stuff signed. And for some of them, they're recruited and found and then given to handlers and made into stars. I think Justin Bieber was such a case, for example, right? I'm by no means the expert on these things. There are many people who know a lot more than me. But my understanding is a lot of the time you're offered fame and riches and this kind of stuff in exchange for signing a contract, or even your parents are, right? I think the biggest criminals are parents who put their kids into that. To me, putting your 7, 8, 10, 9, 10-year-old kid into showbiz, who are you as a parent? What is wrong with you? Love, are you okay? So in those cases, with a lot of this Disney stuff, that this is, I don't know if parents know what they're getting kids into. They have to. They have to tell you what you're getting yourself into. Now, in what detail they tell you, I don't know. But I think a lot of these others, maybe they find some talented artists who are struggling, and basically that's the offer, right? But then once you sign a contract, I think for many of them, maybe it also depends what the terms and conditions they give them, right? Because my understanding is then they have to do what they're told they need to do, but they may be different for different ones, like how they need to influence, like where they need to show up, what they need to do. And maybe as long as they actually fulfill the obligations and they don't go too far away, they leave them alone. And I think it probably depends how much of a threat they are also deemed to be. Do they actually speak out about any of what's going on and then they become an actual threat, or do they just do their part and leave and not?
What's what happened with Kanye West, right? He started to speak out about it, and then they made him out to be like a crazy person. Yeah. But I think that
then they take them for a rehab or something.
Yeah.
Which is just another round of MK Ultra, right? And then you see them come back and they're all like bleach blonde.
What is MK Ultra exactly? It's mind programming, conditioning, altering.
Conditioning, and to my understanding, I need to read the actual files. They're accessible, right? But I think a lot of it is using a lot of trauma to induce programming. It's like a military level is also, they will use trauma to basically program the mind. It's like using a lot of trauma. It's what in the shamanic practicing it would be called soul splitting, right? But it's personality splitting, and it's basically creating massive damage, and then the person becomes a lot more easy to control. And they, I think, also insert memories. You can also insert memories. So that's shown. You can insert fake memories and make people believe they're experiencing something they didn't. So yeah, we live in a very strange world.
We do. We definitely do that. Sometimes I wonder, where are we exactly, and how did we get here, and where is God in all of this?
I'm still not totally clear on that. I'm going to be honest with you. And I've been doing this for a long time. And every time I think I reach some level of certainty, I'm like, and then with things you don't know, like right now I'm going, because I've been called to study this deliverance work more deeply and all this. And now I'm in a period of very deep discernment. I'm like, because we're seeing a lot of people transitioning from New Age back to Christianity. And for me, it's like, I'm starting to understand why they do this, because when you start studying deliverance work, you understand that most people in the New Age, they have no idea what they're doing with love. They don't actually understand energetics. They don't understand any of these things. And there's a lot of worship of what's effectively, according to this deliverance stuff, demons, which, that's not ideal. And it's also it gets so complex. So it's all like keep going, and there's always more. And there's the ETs and the galactic stuff and this. And I'm like, what does it even matter?
ETs and galactics? What's that?
Arcturian, Pleiadian, Lyran, like extraterrestrial activity, like stuff like this, right? And then people are channeling all sorts of things, calling it light language. I'm like, are you sure this is light language? Like, how do you know this is light language? Like, I would not.
What is light language? What is?
They supposedly channel higher beings, like angelic beings or like extraterrestrials who have different forms of language. The only times when I ever listened to light language, it made me feel extremely weird. And again, I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't know where this channeling is coming from, especially if you cannot be certain. And I think this is why mediumship and these kind of things are condemned in the Bible as well. Because what is coming through? Who are you channeling? Is it just some weird like entity there?
That's bad. Online.
I never listened to him, but like I got such strange vibes. I was like, I'm staying far away from this dude.
Yeah. And also Dolores Cannon, and Esther Hicks. You hear some of their talks and presentations, and you think, oh my goodness, that's just genius. That's mind blowing. But then at the same time, I don't know, are we allowed to be doing that? If you're a Christian, how much of that is allowed and how much of that does God not want?
If you're a Christian, mediumship and channeling are pretty off. And I used to do it because I'm a very rebellious kind of person, which this is why for me, there's so much discernment with this, because I'm also like, I know my tendencies are going into the whole rebellion, which is of course the whole Luciferian is like, I want to know. On the other hand, like I'm also not going to submit to just like a doctrine without there being very good reason, which is why I'm studying these things. And I'm like, if you're telling me I'm not supposed to do yoga, I need to understand why you're telling me this.
I was so disappointed with that. I'm like, no, I can't do yoga. Like, are you kidding me right now?
I know. And I'm like, the jury's still out. I'm still seeing if there's a way to wiggle out of this, because I'm like, it's great. And on a lot of these things, they developed incredible technologies. This is why for me, it's also, they're like the way they use movement and breath, and like, especially something like Kriya, Kundalini, it's life changing. And, you know, for me, this is why with these things, I'm like, if I am measuring my advancement, let's say, by fruits of the spirit, which mean becoming much more peaceful, much more kind, compassionate person, a lot of these methodologies helped me get much closer to that than Christianity ever did. Now, that being said, Christianity, I was taught, had no tools, so that's not surprising, and also did not follow the Bible at all. Also, Vatican, anyone.
How much of the Bible do you think is, because sometimes I question, like I've read the Old Testament, and at the end of it, I was almost in tears. I'm like, how can a loving God want all these sacrifices? And how can a loving God respond in the way that he is? I was so confused.
Yeah.
And then I feel like I've read parts of the New Testament. I mean, obviously a lot of that is the disciples retelling this very similar story over and over. But then I'm like, who was Jesus and where was he from this year to that year? Where did he go?
I for those 18 years we don't have in the Bible.
We don't have it in the Bible. Who was he? Where was he? What did he do? How did he grow up? You know, why isn't that in
all
there?
The things we would really need to know. Like, I assume he was in Egypt. I assume he was in India, right?
I heard
he was
that,
probably all those places. But what was he doing there?
What was he doing? What was he doing there?
I agree. And I think we're missing huge parts of the story. And of course, then there's the whole question of what are the things that were left out of the Bible, like Gnostic texts, like why were they left out? What is just doctrine? Yeah, this is the difficulty with it. And I'm now like working with some people who've been researching these things for a lot longer, when they also have been studying the Greek and Hebrew elements of it and the Old Testament. And at least one of them that I study, which basically completely differentiates between, because there are multiple gods in the Old Testament as well, right? I think you have, of course, Yahweh, you have El, but then Jesus also came to break a lot, like parts of that covenant at least. He's not breaking the whole thing. Like, there's my knowledge, there's no way where he says, nah, that was a different God, right? But he's definitely abolishing the blood sacrifice stuff, like animal sacrifice stuff, that's abolished. He's abolishing the eye for an eye. So the vengeance, he's bringing mercy instead. So I would say in a lot of ways, it sounds like a pretty different God. Like, I mean, like where I am now, I'm leaning more towards that what Jesus was teaching was a lot more of what I would call organic source God energy. Whereas Yahweh was, I don't know, an ET, frankly, like potentially they were just fighting with one another, like another like Satan, quote unquote. But I'm not making any of these claims because I cannot do it for certain.
And this is the thing that I find so fascinating. How is it that one of the most important and powerful person, it was God, but in human form, and we don't know, we're all still confused about who he was. Yeah. And it's 2026 and he was here 2026 years ago. And we still don't know. We're still confused. Yeah. So that to me shows the power that he has and the importance that he has. Do you think that he came here to teach us and give us the codes or the way to break out of the matrix when we pass?
I think so. That's my current understanding, especially with seeing what he was teaching as sin being the understanding of how you break contracts with the demonic influence. I think in a lot of ways he came, and I wonder, I've been just thinking about that in the past days. I'm not claiming this is true. Because for me, I was always like, why did he have to die on the cross? This is just such a gruesome way to go. But then if you understand that the covenants up until that point was always blood sacrifice, I wonder if part of that had to be like the legitimate sacrifice aspect because of how it was done to the old gods. And I think this is the problem with, there is so much context that one needs to understand about how things were before. I was raised Catholic, and you're taught, it's kind of like cherry picking. Oh, this part is mythology and this part actually happened. What if none of it is mythology? What if the whole Old Testament is just the history of all this, right? And when you start understanding there is the supernatural world, there is the demonic world, all of this, right? You have to reframe this whole thing and think about it differently. But I think Jesus came in a lot of ways to show us, to teach the unconditional love aspect, to bring the unconditionally loving God, but also to show what is the sin, which are the things that actually make us slaves to the demonic bondage. And to be like, yo, guys, don't do this. Also, if you're walking around in my name, you can bind anything in heavens and on earth, right? So he gave that apostolic power of like in my name, you can bind anything. And this to me, what really for me, we talked about yoga and stuff, started convincing me that maybe I need to move away from that, was reading these deliverance books and listening to podcasts. And when they're talking about exorcism of Shiva, Vishnu, like what they call it, demonic trinities, and these different other things. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And then you start reading. I went down the rabbit hole the other day of reading about a lot of these Indian saints that were worshiping certain things. They went insane towards the end, and they're describing them as saints because they had some healing abilities. But I'm like, this is textbook demonic possession. This is not okay, right? They're describing someone who, could heal people, but was basically completely incapable of functioning in the society and was living in charnel grounds next to corpses and dogs and jackals. And I'm like, no. If you're calling that a saint, we gotta cultivate discernment in your culture. And one of the most interesting things for me, and there's so much stuff I've been thinking about that they're describing in these deliverance books, they're describing about Haiti. And they said that when they became independent from the occupation, I think it was French and the British, they threw a massive celebration, and it was a big voodoo ceremony with blood sacrifices and all this. And you can go apparently to their museum, and these guys are describing, because they went to do basically deliverance work in Haiti. And what to me was shocking, what they're describing, is that when you come to the border with Venezuela, up to that border with Haiti, it's rainforest, it's diversity. And past that point is pretty much drought. And we're thinking about how Haiti is consistently a place with so much natural turmoil, so many natural issues. And what they're saying is that's what happens. Like when you're worshiping these demonic forces, and you think about countries like India with a history of Hinduism, the caste system, the massive inequality, the poverty, the math doesn't math. And obviously we have a lot of issues here in the West, don't get me wrong. But I would say compared to a lot of other countries, we have certain advancement and equality in a culture that is not found elsewhere. And there are certain things that are built on Christian values that are beneficial for a society. And don't get me wrong, the church and Christianity are two very different things. The church has not adhered to it, which is why we had the splitting of the church multiple times. I think most churches does not follow the Bible. I think a lot of it is extremely demonic, and Masons took it over, like Vatican is, again, one of the worst rabbit holes probably. But the truth is that the forces you worship in one place, they're going to influence what is happening to that area. And when you look at the places that worship a lot of dark forces, there are a lot of problems they have going on. So basically, this is my current level of nerding out and my current area. And I'll probably know a lot more in a few months or years as I dive deeper into this. But it's very fascinating. It's very,
I'd love to have you on once you've dived into it a lot deeper, because I love this topic. I have such a curious mind, and I often question many things, and I'm curious about many things. And spirituality, I don't like using the word religion because I feel like there's so much politics in it.
Yeah.
But I think the religion that we're talking about, Christianity, and just the meaning to all of this. So definitely would love to have you on once you've delved deeper into that topic and pick your brains with it. On that note, though, I'm looking at the time and I'm mindful that we've been on
over 2 hours.
Only 2 hours. And I'm sure we can spend another 2 hours talking about all of this and then some, but I am mindful of time. So I guess we will end it here. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. It was such an amazing conversation, and just hearing you talk about all the things that you discussed were just fascinating, so fascinating. If there's someone out there that's listening to this podcast, what would you want them to take away? If there's one thing that they could take away from this conversation, what would that be?
Oof. One thing I would want you to take away. Keep trusting the path that is unfolding in front of you. And if you have a desire to experience a life that's different, if you know that you are meant to have a life that is a lot more free, a lot more abundant, a lot more full of health and vitality, follow that. Keep searching and keep moving in that direction, and stay curious about it.
I love that. I love that answer so much. Thank you so much again for coming on. I really appreciate your time and all your wisdom and knowledge and experience and sharing that on my podcast. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned before, Instagram is definitely the best platform to connect. I share a lot of like short form content stuff there. I have my own podcast as well. It's called the 1% Frequency Podcast. I'm probably going to go through like rebranding at some point this year, but for now, that's still what it is. And then I have a free membership, as I mentioned as well. And that free membership, this is especially amazing for you if you're an entrepreneur and you resonated or like you enjoyed a lot of the stuff we talked about, especially earlier on. But in general, like I share a lot about these different topics as well. So you can expect some of that too. So what I have there is that when you sign up, you immediately get access to, I think it's probably over 20 hours of different subconscious reprogramming materials completely for free on money, sales, visibility, all these different areas. And then there's a free podcast in Telegram as well, where you can you can connect with community as well. But there's also a channel where I drop these different, at this point, there's probably over 100 episodes there that you can just find there on these different topics, going deep into the subconscious, understanding it, but then also some of the conspiracy stuff, a lot of different things that we talked about. So if you're enjoying these topics, it's also I hear a lot of people who love to just put it on when they go for walks and just listen to it. And yeah, it's a great resource. And as I said, it's completely for free. So I would recommend definitely checking that out as well if you enjoyed this conversation.
I'm definitely going to be one of them.
I would love having you in.
Yeah. Really look forward to staying in touch and listening to a lot more of your material. But on that note, we'll end it here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.